Okay, so it's 3 o'clock. I can see a lot of our attendees have entered the room, and I think we should get started. Welcome to a webinar today on how to build strategic learning and evaluation systems. We're so happy to have all of you here and that we've been able to gather a lot of different foundations and actors from different countries. That's very cool. We are hosting the webinar today because we want to inspire a conversation on how to work with impact and learning in the philanthropic world. And also this webinar is inspired by some of our international clients who have followed some of our other webinars and expressed a curiosity on us speaking about strategic learning and evaluation. So that's why we're here today. And measuring and understanding impact is on the top of many agendas today. However, many are still struggling to fully understand how to grasp this and work with this in the future. So today, my colleagues Christian and Jesper will present some of the many aspects of how we are working with impact in dumbbell analytics and how we are trying to focus on adding an AI tech element to evaluation in order to professionalize it and support the philanthropic practice. And I want to briefly introduce us before getting started. My name is Sophie, and I'm a consultant here in Dumbbell. The presenters are Christian Puggaard, who is a managing partner, and Jesper, who is a senior consultant in our Stockholm office. And we will record the webinar today so that we're able to share it with you afterwards, and you can watch it back and share it with your networks if there's anything you want to re-investigate or share with your colleagues. And also, as an extension, we want to encourage all of you to reach out to us if there's any of the topics that we cover today you want to explore further. We want to offer you a strategic session with us where we can get to know each other more on a deeper level and how our approaches and methods can be relevant to your organization specifically. So before giving the word to Christian, I just want to encourage you to ask us questions in the chat all the way through the presentation. We only have 30 minutes together today, and we don't want to miss out on any of your good questions or inputs. So feel free to chat us questions, and we will try to answer them throughout our presentation. All right, that was the introduction talk. Now I'm going to give the word to Christian.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you everybody to follow us here today, and also those of you who are gonna follow this recording afterwards. We are so fortunate that some of those participants are coming from the West Coast in the United States and Canada, so we are fully aware that it's in the middle of the night now, so what we hope that you will enjoy this no matter what. And also just want to here in the beginning, just give you all encourage you all to reach out, as Sophie says right now, and also afterwards. So if you want to, we're going to make a 2 hours online strategic advice session on how to build this and how you can elaborate even further with some of these things yourselves. But basically, this about strategic learning and evaluation is about understanding how to make more good for the same money, or influence the world and the people that we want to influence even more. And often you see like an organization having a goal that could be improve kids' life. It could be in Greenland, it could be in Africa, but trying to improve kids' life who have kids who have social issues, for instance. And sometimes organizations decide, well, let's try to, for instance, let's do this with funding. But funding doesn't do it by itself. So typically, you'll fund some kind of activities that could be, for instance, be writing a book about how to handle social issues within a specific domain. And the output of this is a book that has been written. It's done. It's there. It's in the press. And hopefully, it's a great book. And if it's a great book, then will also be sold in some volumes. We don't know exactly how many, but it will typically be sold, and hopefully it'll be read by somebody. And those people who are going to read this book about this practice, they might change the practice. They might become better, or be aware of how they could change things. And when they start doing and changing that practice, that is in the end where they're gonna look at how to improve. In reality, they're gonna improve kids' life if this practice is the right one that's going to improve a kid's life. And typically, this is what a lot of organizations out there would call a change theory or program theory. So how can we actually influence organizations? How can they work and influence the long-term impact afterwards? So this is a standard way of trying to putting it together in an input, activities, output to outcome. And one of the important things when you look at the outcome is that you have to look at short-term and long-term. Most organizations, not all of them, but most organizations are able to measure from input to output. Input activities, and so what do we do? And that is important. But if you're not only thinking about charity, but you're thinking about change, then you want to look at outcome afterwards. And the next step here for organizations would typically be to look at the short term. It's more difficult to get an understanding of the long term, and it's more difficult to get an understanding of the wider impacts that's afterwards. But actually, this is where change happens. So you need to understand and build this change theory, and you need to map out all of these dependencies here. The next thing is obviously that sometimes you fund a project, or you fund a couple of projects, or you have a program that consists of a number of projects where you need to look at how do these actually influence each other and combined to handle a bigger issue on a societal level or a community level, to handle some of these issues here. And the one thing is to look at the aggregate impacts, but you also need to look at impacts at a more holistic level. So, okay, how can a broader impact, how can you look at and define a broader impact here? So one of the things that we have been looking at is that if you look at here to the left, we have made a brief chart here. You can see that there could be some KPIs development in the society or in the community that you're looking at, or in the group of people that you're trying to influence on a larger scale. And these are the projects or the program that you have been engaged in developing. So no matter how things go with these things that you've been funding and the activities and the output and the outcomes, how they are developing down the line, you'll typically look at, is this going up or down in the society? Because you will look at identifying these are some of the problems that we're handling. However, your ability to influence these things depend a lot on your position on an overall societal level. So and when you look at that, we utilize this cube that you got here to the right. So that is a model that looks at three different aspects. And one aspect is your own capacity. If you're a big funder, a big foundation in the world that you're trying to influence, you could be a small foundation on a global scale, but a big foundation in a local community. So if you're a big foundation in a local community, or you're a big foundation on a global scale, you can influence things a lot yourselves. But also you have to look at as well at the same time, what are the other agents' capacity in this area, and to what extent is this is the area that you're trying to influence? To what extent is that it's an impact? Can you do an impact for that area? So you need to look at these three things here. And typically, what you do here is to do an impact, a landscape analysis, or map out your position in the society on a more general level. So if you look at two examples here, this could be that could be a foundation. If we're talking Denmark, for instance, it would typically be the Novo Nordisk Foundation, or within some domains, and also on a global level. In a lot of areas, it could be like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that are big foundations who are able to influence a lot if they invest a lot in a community. So here's an example of an organization that is funding, and they have they're able to impact a lot because they have a own capacity that's big, and others aren't that big. On the other hand, you have another one, B here, so they don't have a big capacity themselves. However, there are a lot of other agents who have capacities, So the consequence of this is twofold. First is that A will have a big influence on the society as general, and therefore they need to look at what kind of overall societal measures are we looking at that we're trying to improve here, and they would typically be responsible, or at least have quite a significant impact whether or not this is declining or increasing the KPI that the figures they're looking at. On the other hand, this one to here, they would have a low chance of influencing these goals, so that means something for the strategy that they engage in. Typically, they need to work along with the others. But it also has an important influence on what they're going to evaluate and how they're going to do this. So this 1A here, they will have to work with macro analytics themselves. Also, how are things actually developing on a societal level, while B here, that would be out of scope of their issue. So that's really important when you work with this area. Another thing that you need to learn about and understand is, I just talked about the program theory. Well, this is the program theory. To the upper left corner, you see input, and then you see activity, output, and outcomes. That is program or change theory. However, program and change theories, they don't just happen in a vacuum. They happen along with other stuff that's happening. So what is the organization and leadership across the organizations that are actually engaged in this area, and how do they execute the plans that they're going to work with? A second thing is the context. How is the context around the projects or the funding and the programs they're going to work with, and also which collaborative parties are really engaged in this area, and how do they collaborate, and how do they influence our ability to look at this change theory and look at it. So while the change theory will often be something that you can measure, sometimes the other stuff is something that you need to go dig more into on a more qualitative level. However, if you want to learn from it and change your course along the way, or after a project or program is done and you want to start another one, you need to understand how these things evolve at the same time. Also, you're not completely independent of the target group. How are they doing? What are they doing? How are they influenced by other factors? As well as the measure and process description of the things that you're doing. The good part is, if you're doing this great in a good manner, in a good way, then you'll also understand if this is a project or program you're carrying out for a while. You'll be able to understand, how can we actually do this after the program or the project's funding is over. I've got an example here. So in Denmark, we have had a program or a big research project for over a couple of years, trying to address kids who've had big psychiatric and psychological issues themselves. And and they funded this project with 50 million Danish kroner, trying to see how actually these things could be improved by use of psychologists, and improve the psychologists in the municipalities. How can they actually how could that develop over time, and how can we make better practices? And in this case, they had to look into what are the measures, the way they're doing this, and how is that actually impacting not only what are they doing, but how are the individual psychologists working with this area, and what is that actually impacting the outcome of it, and of the efforts here. And that is really important if you want to implement it on a larger scale afterwards. So that is understanding a bit about program theory, but also how you need to look at that in relation to the context around a project and a funding area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It seems like there's a bit of an echo. Let's see.
I don't do an echo, but let's.
No, you don't? Okay, great. Maybe it's just me. Thank you for that presentation, Christian. Before handing the word to Jesper, we just have a question. We have two, but maybe I'll save the one for later. Before this webinar, I have one of the participants reach out to me and being curious about how we work with principle-based evaluation. So maybe, Christian, you could try to elaborate a bit on how does this implementation model relate to principle-based evaluation, and how do we work with that?
Yeah, well, principle-based evaluation is something that is really having some heydays now, and Michael Patton has been one of the authors behind some great books about the area. I think it has a lot of great features. One of it is actually also evaluation and the ability to measure and test whether or not there is an impact or not. However, they also look at what kind of principles do we look at when we start working with a program or a project, and furthermore, when we evaluate that down the line, what are the principles? Which ethical principles are we going for? For instance, let's say it's a gender issue or it's a climate issue, then we need to have some of the things behind that as well along the way. Also, there's a focus on being able to adjust and react along the way while projects and dynamics are changing themselves. And if you look at this here, you can say that is also really important in an implementation model, because you don't do it just to know something that you know afterwards. This succeeded because of that, or it failed because of this. Instead, you need to engage in it. I think often we see that a lot of foundations or a lot of funders in general, they invite either external evaluators like ours or their own internal evaluators in too late, because they need to integrate the learning along the journey, and doing this kind of a developmental evaluation where you are able to build upon some of the issues and the knowledge that you gain throughout carrying out initiatives and activities. I hope that was good enough. You're more than welcome to reach out to us afterwards if you want us to elaborate even more upon that.
Great. Thank you, Pascal. Okay, I want to pass the word on to Jesper. He's going to tell us a bit about the more concrete methods that we use here in Denmark. Take it away, Jesper.
Thanks for that, Sophie. I'll try to speed up a bit. So let's first go back to Christian's example of the connection between input and the long-term outcome. So from our experience working with foundations, we rarely see that the short and long-term outcomes are measured and examined, and one can wonder, why is that? Obviously, the easy answer is because it's very hard to do that. From our experience, direct and instant output is usually captured during the reporting period of a project, but often a project is complete before the impact is fully known, and impact beyond the lifespan of a project is therefore often ignored. So the recipients are no longer required to report results after the reporting period, so the reporting naturally stops. So when evaluating results of a project only based on that direct output of the project, the risk of formulating new strategies or programs based on inaccurate evaluations, that naturally increases. And the clear development that we see in this sector actually points to automating and standardizing data collection and including external data through APIs, which I will come back to. So for example, in a recent procurement of the Research Council of Norway, they are procuring a new digital system just to support their core business. The things they mentioned they want to do is to increase their proactive use of data in all stages of the process, include external data sources, and also try to reduce unnecessary administrative burden by using new technology. And I will try to show you a brief overview of some of the more recent technologies that can help. And as both Sophie and Christian has said, we would love to discuss it with you after our presentations or anytime later. So let's begin with this. As I mentioned, systematizing and also automating data collection are some of the trends we see. So most foundations collect data from the projects. A lot of data come from the recipients during the reporting period. As you can see here to the left, I have given some examples of project data, company identification number, researcher name, project name, and so on. The direct output could be, for example, number of projects started, number of publications published, number of PhD graduates, basically things you can measure within the reporting period. What many are missing, though, is to actually have a proper system set up for systematizing and automating this kind of data collection. So by storing the data in separate PDFs or Excels or Word files, the way you do it, the possibilities to improve efficiency and actually using the data in the daily work is reduced. There is also a second level, you could say, which also we see very rarely is used. That is the external data sources. So for example, that could be official data from a company registry. It could be publication data from publication databases such as Scopus or PubMed. It could be legislative data. It could be environmental data, for example. But actually, a lot of the relevant external data are available through open APIs. And by connecting these kind of external data sources directly to the projects, it allows you to get an even more detailed understanding of how the projects are developing. And by using APIs to collect external data, it would be fairly easy for you to automate data collection that could be used for both short-term and long-term effect evaluations, actually. Another recent development, an interesting thing we see is in the use of text analysis to get a deeper understanding of the funded projects. It is specifically used when you're not only interested in the academic impact of a project, such as citations in top-ranked journals, but rather to identify the dissemination of the project results in other parts of the society, such as in legislation, environmental bills, the policy impact, and so on. And the idea of using text analysis is to improve your ability to trace the impact. So instead of going through millions of pages manually to hopefully identify an outcome, the text algorithms will do the desk research, the dirty work for you, while also documenting it. To the right, you can see a screen dump of a text analysis solution that we actually have developed. And it lets you type in, for example, a description of a project or upload a written article or research paper. And then by using text analysis, it will find pages on the internet where the projects are mentioned by word or actually also by context. So if, for example, you are interested in if a 10-year-old research program you funded has affected environmental protection laws or bills, you can use this tool to see if the results from the program have influenced the legislation or bill recommendations in this area.
Can I jump in with a question before you move on, Jesper?
Yes.
Cool, because David asked us a good question. To what extent are external data sources available in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's obviously different situations between for low and middle income countries, but a lot of data is actually also available for those countries. It's collected in a different manner, for example, for surveys. So the detail level is sometimes lower, of course, than what it is perhaps in Sweden, where I'm. But some data is still available. And by connecting that kind of data to your own project data, which is probably more, could be on a more detailed level, that would give the overview picture, be a clear picture of the overview, actually.
If I could add to that, I completely agree on that. Furthermore, you can think that sometimes, it's important that you think about this when you start the program or start the project, so that you have a good data strategy for what you're going to measure and along the way, so that you don't just do it in the end. So you can put this in how you design your program and your data collection along the way.
Yes. So, should I move on, perhaps?
Yeah, good idea.
This is the last part. So that that was what I presented was a very brief dive into some of the recent developments we are seeing in this space. We would of course be happy to dive deeper for more than 10 minutes into this and share our knowledge with you later on. But before we let you ask questions to us, I would like to talk a little bit about data readiness and essentially how we think about when, what, and how to collect data. So if we begin with when to collect data, this is like quite straightforward for you, I assume. But if you try to actually write this down for how your organization works, it might not be that easy. Input is collected, as it says, pre-project, and activities during projects, output in the end of a project. The outcome part, as we have mentioned, is definitely the hardest part because the data needs to be collected after the project reporting period, so there won't be any data from the recipients. For the what part, in this case, internal data is collected pre-project. That could be, for example, how much funding goes into the project or who is participating and so on. And the recipient reporting is based on the project updates, perhaps early output, published articles, new collaborations could be examples of that. And to measure the short-term and long-term outcome, you also need to collect external data, which I talked about earlier. It could, for example, be if it could be data from a company registry, which is automatically updated to your system. And if you have funded a collaboration between academia and a company, you could automate the tracking of how the company develops post-project. And by using that data, you could later on perform an impact evaluation with control groups on the data you had already collected. Finally, how to collect the data. We believe that, as we have showed, that data collection on input, activities, and output can be automated to a large extent. As we have demonstrated in some ways. And the outcome part is hard to automate because when trying to find causal effects or trace a very long theory of change, you cannot only rely on automated data collection. You obviously need to do more to find that and use the experience. But by systematizing and automating data collection and also utilizing new technologies such as AI and text analysis, your organization will start to improve in a hopefully continuous loop of strategic learning. That was basically all I had for this presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jesper. We have a couple of questions and 2 minutes left, so let's see if we can get through at least some of them. I'm going to start with you, Thomas. You posed a very interesting question. Do you have any examples of how measuring outcomes of basic science funding outcomes can be super long-term?
Yeah, maybe if I should take a first one on that. I think I completely agree with you. And one of the things is obviously to try to measure and follow the path of this knowledge in different ways. One is typically the typical bibliometric thing. So here's an academic article. How is that actually developed over time? The good thing about this is that typically we have registries, so we can look at for how long time are things actually cited. And I think that for a bigger medical funding foundation, we looked at some stuff where we could actually see citations going more than 60 years back, but then you can also look at other types of impacts. So you can look at when do they actually, when do they peak, if you could put it like that. And sometimes you see the impacts after. I think the average use of knowledge from basic funding has been shown to be proven to be around 27 years. You could also go into other stuff such as how does that knowledge and that information translate into, for instance, medical guidelines or legislation down the line. And in that case, obviously, you need to make a good track of it on a systematic level. But you can do it, and we've seen it done in other cases.
Let's do one more, the last one maybe. Can you say a few words about what are the most common pitfalls when monitoring and evaluating projects?
That's a difficult one, yes, but I think that's for you.
The most common pitfalls when monitoring and evaluating projects, naturally, or the low-hanging fruit here would be to basically, it's almost related to the question that was asked before, and that is naturally you need to actually start by monitoring and actually do the connection. Even if it's long-term outcomes, you need to actually start trying to measure and trying to find out, okay, what is it that we want to measure, or what is our actual vision for this, what is the goals, and then from that try to trace back to, okay, what kind of activities are we doing, what kind of input are we putting into the funding, just to do that connection so that when you do gather some data, you could actually see the connection between what you are doing and then the final goals. So one of the pitfalls, I would say, is not to have that theory of change clear from the beginning when you start to evaluate, and then you can just, if you just add on data and data and data, and then you don't know what you're measuring for, that could be a pitfall.
And if I should add to that, I'd say that a lot of it is also around a lot of organizations. They're trying to do this too late. They're doing it post funding or post projects, or you should consider doing it along the way already from the beginning. Not just asking for it in the beginning, but start implementing it in the beginning. If not, you aren't able to utilize it.
Great, thank you. I think we should wrap it up. We have already passed the time limit by 1 minute. So thank you so much for participating and posing some very interesting questions. As I mentioned, we have recorded the webinar and we'll be sending it to you tomorrow with our slides as well, so you can read it back and see if there's anything you want to discover more. And finally, again, please reach out to us if you have any questions that pop up in your head afterwards, and let us know. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye-bye.